10-year-old Jake stood nervously in the courtroom, ready to testify against his mother. The room was filled with tension as everyone awaited his words. The case had already garnered significant attention. Now, Jake's testimony was the moment everyone had been waiting for. His hands shook slightly as he clutched the microphone. When he finally spoke, the details of his story left the jury in tears, unable to contain their emotions. "My future is ruined," were Jake's first heartbreaking words. He didn't dare to look at his mother, so he looked at his lawyer instead. "It's okay. Take your time," the judge said, as he realized how much Jake struggled with telling his story. Just a month ago, his life was normal, and he only worried about who he wanted to play with after school. But now, he worried about things a 10-year-old shouldn't even know about. "I first noticed something was wrong when a lot of mail piled up on the table," Jake said between his sobs. The whole courtroom was silent, and everyone listened intently. "Mommy used me," he continued. "She did a bad thing," he suddenly yelled out. This was simply too much for a young child. The court hearing was briefly paused so a child therapist could calm Jake down a bit. After that, the court hearing continued. The room was packed with people interested in the case. Marianne and Jake had been the talk of the town these last few weeks, and even the media was present. But what had Marianne done? Why did she ruin Jake's future? And what did she use Jake for? To really understand the depth of what Marianne had done, I have to take you back a few weeks, to the moment Jake first began to grow suspicious of his mother. He had picked up a letter off the ground, which had his name on it. So naturally, he looked inside. He had never received mail before, so he was very excited. But when he looked inside, he was confused. He saw all sorts of numbers and words he didn't understand. When he tried to ask his mother about it, she quickly snatched the letter out of his hands and told him to go upstairs. It was clear that his mother was hiding something from him. Even he could see that. He began to notice more and more strange things. His mother was often on the phone, having hushed conversations. She was also very protective of her wallet, and would never give Jake any cash if he asked about it. Finally, Jake was suddenly always the last one to be picked up from school, which he never was before. He began to feel more and more neglected, and wanted to figure out what had made his mother change so suddenly. He was still a child, but a very clever one. He tricked his mother into signing a note saying they were going on vacation for a week, so he could skip school to investigate. Every time his mother dropped him off, he pretended to walk to the school entrance, but then quickly turned around. He quickly figured out that his mother wasn't going to her job. He knew where she worked, and stopped by one day to see what she was doing. But when he asked the lady at the front desk, she told him his mother hadn't come to work for the last few weeks. He was totally stunned. His mother wasn't only lying to him, but to her boss as well. One day, while at home on the weekends, his mother's phone rang. Jake sprinted to the phone to see who was calling her, and was shocked to see his father's name on the screen. His mother walked into the room just as Jake wanted to pick up and quickly took the call elsewhere. Listening intently, Jake could hear the conversation was heated. Fearing his mother had gotten into trouble, or worse, did something bad, Jake went to the police. It seemed like the best option for him at the time, as he could only do so much. At the police station, the officers took his worry surprisingly seriously. They wrote down all the strange things he had noticed and promised to look into it. One night, Jake saw his mother sneaking out of the house. He watched from his bedroom window as she slipped into the dark, heading toward the dimly lit parking lot at the end of their street. Her movements were quick and secretive, as if she didn't want anyone to see her. Jake's curiosity grew, and he felt a chill run down his spine. Who was she meeting at this hour? And why was she being so secretive? Determined to find out what his mother was up to, Jake decided to follow her one night. He stayed hidden behind bushes and parked cars, making sure not to make a sound. His heart pounded in his chest as he kept a safe distance. As he crept closer, he could see his mother moving towards a group of unfamiliar people standing under a flickering street lamp. What could she possibly be doing here? From his hiding spot, Jake watched as his mother approached a man. They both looked around nervously, ensuring they weren't being watched. She handed him a stack of documents, and he did the same. The exchange was quick, almost rehearsed. The man glanced over the papers before slipping them into his jacket. Jake's mind raced with questions. What kind of documents were they exchanging? And why all the secrecy? Jake crouched behind a dumpster, trying to hear their conversation. He could catch snippets of their hushed voices, but not enough to understand what they were saying. The tension in the air was palpable. Every now and then, his mother and the man would glance around, as if they sensed someone was watching. Jake's heart raced as he strained to hear more. The mystery of his mother's actions deepened. The whole scenario made Jake's skin crawl. The secrecy and the late-night meetings only intensified his fears about his mother's activities. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. As he snuck back home, his mind was filled with dread and confusion. What was his mother involved in? He knew he needed to talk to someone, but who could he trust with this heavy secret? Jake decided to confide in his best friend Emma about what he had discovered. He hoped she could help him make sense of it all. After school, he pulled her aside and nervously shared everything he had seen. Emma listened closely, her face growing more serious with each detail. "This sounds really scary, Jake," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We need to figure out what's really going on." Emma listened intently, her eyes wide with concern, as Jake recounted the late-night meeting he had witnessed. "I can't believe your mom would do something like that," she whispered. "What do you think those documents were?" Jake shrugged, feeling more confused than ever. "I don't know, but it can't be good," he replied. Emma nodded, her mind already working on a plan to help her friend. Emma's father was a lawyer, and she promised to ask him for advice without revealing too much of Jake's story. "My dad might know what to do," she said confidently. "I won't tell him everything, just enough to get some guidance." Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him. "Thanks, Emma," he said, feeling grateful to have a friend like her. "I really appreciate it." Jake felt a small relief, knowing he wasn't alone in this anymore, and that Emma and her father might help. That night, he slept a little easier, comforted by the thought that they were working together to solve this mystery. The next day, Emma met him at their usual spot, a determined look on her face. "My dad had some good ideas," she said. "We need to talk after school." They agreed to meet the next day after school to discuss what Emma's father had suggested. Jake felt a mix of nervousness and hope as the school day dragged on. Finally, the bell rang, and they found a quiet spot to talk. "So, what did he say?" Jake asked eagerly. Emma took a deep breath. "He thinks we should gather more information before going to the authorities," she explained. "We need proof." Jake began to see a pattern in his mother's behavior. He noticed she was always anxious whenever the mail arrived. Her hands would shake as she sorted through the letters, and she often glanced around nervously. Whenever a new envelope came in, she would quickly tuck it away in her room, avoiding any questions. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that these letters were somehow connected to the strange activities he had witnessed. His mother had started locking herself in her room with piles of paperwork. She would emerge only after hours, looking exhausted and frazzled. Jake could hear the rustling of papers through the door, and sometimes catch glimpses of her hurriedly stuffing things into drawers. Each time she came out, she seemed more on edge. Jake wondered what could be so important that she needed to hide it away so desperately. Jake watched his mother nervously pace around the house, her eyes glued to her phone. She checked her messages constantly and would often stop in her tracks, staring at the screen with a worried expression. The tension was palpable, and her anxious behavior only fueled Jake's growing fears. What was making her so nervous, and how did it all connect to the secret meetings he had seen? Jake knew these clues were pieces of a much larger puzzle, but he couldn't fit them together yet. The pattern of anxiety, the locked doors, and the constant checking were just parts of something bigger. He felt like he was missing a crucial piece of the story. Determined to understand, he decided to keep observing his mother's behavior, hoping to uncover more that would make sense of the situation. Determined to find out more, Jake started paying closer attention to his mother's activities. He watched her every move, noting the times she was out or on the phone. He carefully recorded her routines, trying to piece together her daily schedule. Each new observation added to his growing list of suspicions. Jake knew that the more he learned, the closer he would get to solving the mystery of his mother's secret. One afternoon, while his mother was out, Jake managed to sneak into her room. Driven by curiosity and fear, he carefully slipped inside, closing the door behind him. His heart raced as he began to search through her drawers and cabinets. The room was filled with scattered papers and old files. Jake's eyes widened as he stumbled upon documents with his forged signature and numerous bank statements. He knew he had found something important. Jake rifled through the papers, his hands trembling. The documents were filled with numbers and signatures that he didn't understand, but the sight of his own name on some of them made his stomach churn. Bank statements showed large transactions, all in his mother's name. Each discovery seemed to confirm his worst fears. His mother was involved in something serious, and it was worse than he had imagined. The magnitude of his mother's betrayal left Jake in tears as he stared at the evidence of her deception. He felt a heavy weight in his chest. The trust he had in her shattered. The documents were proof of something illegal, and it hurt to think that his own mother was behind it. Sitting on the edge of the bed, he wondered how he would ever face her again. Jake knew he had to act, even though the thought of turning his mother in filled him with dread. The evidence was too significant to ignore, but the idea of betraying his own family was terrifying. He wrestled with his emotions, trying to decide the right course of action. With a deep breath, he made up his mind to bring the documents to Emma's father. It was the only way to seek help. Jake carefully placed everything back as he found it, making sure not to leave any evidence of his intrusion. He wiped his tears and took one last look around before leaving the room. He felt a mix of guilt and determination. He knew he had to show the documents to Emma's father, no matter how hard it was. As he closed the door behind him, he resolved to take the next step in uncovering the truth. That evening, Jake confronted his mother, his voice shaking as he asked her directly about the documents he had found. "Mom, why are there papers with my name on them?" he demanded, trying to stay calm. His mother's face turned pale, and she looked caught off guard. "What are you talking about, Jake?" she snapped, avoiding his gaze. The tension in the room was thick, and Jake felt a cold lump of fear in his throat. His mother became furious and defensive, denying everything. "You have no right to go through my stuff," she yelled, her voice echoing through the house. "You're grounded for snooping." She grabbed her purse and stormed out of the room. Jake's heart sank as he realized she wasn't going to admit anything. Her reaction only made him more certain that she was hiding something big and dangerous. This reaction confirmed Jake's suspicions that his mother was deeply involved in something illegal and dangerous. As he sat in his room, still grounded, he replayed the confrontation in his mind. The way she avoided his questions and reacted so angrily made it clear she was trying to cover up her actions. Jake's fear grew, knowing he was dealing with something far more serious than he had ever imagined. Jake's heart ached with confusion and betrayal as his mother stormed out of the room, leaving him grounded. He felt the weight of her deception press down on him, the trust he once had in her shattered. Sitting alone in his room, he tried to understand how things had gone so wrong. It was hard to believe that the person he had always relied on could be involved in such serious wrongdoing. He decided to move forward with his plan, knowing he couldn't trust his mother anymore. The thought of going to Emma's father for help was daunting, but Jake knew it was the only option. He needed to uncover the full extent of his mother's actions and put an end to the deceit. Determined, he prepared to meet with Emma's father, ready to take the next step in exposing the truth. Desperate and scared, Jake reached out to Emma's father, Mr. Thompson. They arranged to meet secretly at a small cafe after school. Jake was nervous as he approached the table where Mr. Thompson was waiting. "Thank you for meeting me," Jake said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Mr. Thompson nodded reassuringly, ready to hear everything Jake had to say about his mother's troubling activities. Jake explained everything he had discovered, laying out the forged documents and bank statements on the cafe table. Mr. Thompson examined the papers closely, his expression growing serious. "This is serious," he said, looking up at Jake. "You did the right thing by coming to me." Jake felt a mix of relief and anxiety as Mr. Thompson promised to help him with the next steps in dealing with his mother's illegal activities. Emma's father promised to help Jake gather more evidence and protect his identity throughout the process. "We need to be careful," Mr. Thompson said, "but I'll make sure you're safe. We'll build a stronger case and get to the bottom of this." Jake felt a small spark of hope, knowing he wasn't alone and that Mr. Thompson was committed to helping him gave him the courage to move forward. It was a risky move, but Jake felt it was his only option to stop his mother's deceitful actions. He was determined to see this through, even if it meant facing uncomfortable truths and dangerous situations. With Mr. Thompson's help, Jake knew he had a chance to expose the full extent of his mother's wrongdoing and prevent further harm. He just hoped they would succeed before things got any worse. They devised a plan to collect more concrete proof before going to the authorities. Mr. Thompson suggested they monitor Jake's mother's activities closely and gather any additional evidence they could find. Jake agreed, feeling a mix of nervousness and determination. As they outlined their strategy, Jake realized this was the only way to bring his mother's illegal actions to light and make sure justice was served. Shifting the focus back to the courtroom, Jake sat quietly as the courtroom reopened. The tension in the room was palpable as everyone awaited his next words. Jake fidgeted nervously with his hands, glancing at his mother, who sat on the opposite side of the room. The judge looked at Jake with a reassuring nod, signaling that it was time for him to continue his testimony. The judge asked Jake to continue his testimony, and the room fell silent. Every eye was on Jake as he took a deep breath, preparing to recount his journey. The weight of the courtroom's expectations pressed down on him, but he knew he had to be strong. His voice trembled slightly, but he managed to start detailing the steps he had taken to bring his mother to court. Taking a deep breath, Jake described how he took his mother to court. He recounted the moments of fear and determination as he gathered evidence, met with Emma's father, and prepared for this day. "It wasn't easy," Jake said, "but I had to do it." His words were a testament to his bravery, as he laid out the path he had walked to reach this crucial point in the case. He spoke of the evidence he had gathered and the help he received from Emma's father in building the case. "Emma's father helped me collect everything we needed," Jake explained. We had bank statements, forged documents, and even recorded conversations. His voice grew steadier as he highlighted the critical role Emma's father played in making the case against his mother stronger. The courtroom was captivated as each word from Jake added weight to the gravity of his mother's actions. The jurors listened intently, their expressions reflecting the seriousness of the evidence presented. Jake could see the impact of his testimony, knowing that each detail was crucial in painting a clear picture of his mother's wrongdoings and the consequences she would face. Jake described how Emma's father helped him collect all the evidence needed to build a solid case. "We went through countless bank statements and forged documents," Jake said, his eyes focused on the court as he spoke. "Emma's father even helped us record conversations that clearly showed my mother's involvement." His voice carried the weight of the effort they'd put in, highlighting the critical support Emma's father provided in their quest for truth. They gathered a mountain of evidence: bank statements, forged documents, and recorded conversations. Jake recounted, "Each piece of evidence was like another puzzle piece falling into place." The court listened intently as Jake detailed how these items pointed to his mother's guilt, connecting the dots that made the case against her stronger with every new discovery. The gravity of the situation grew clearer with each bit of proof presented. The case against Jake's mother was becoming stronger. Every new piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of her crimes, Jake explained. The courtroom absorbed his words, understanding how each document and recording built a stronger case. The clarity of the situation grew, revealing a comprehensive view of his mother's illegal activities. It was like the final strokes of a painting revealing the full story. The emotional toll on Jake was immense. "It was hard to keep my focus with everything happening," he admitted, his voice strained. Even though he remained determined, the weight of the situation was evident. Jake knew this was a crucial battle, but each step took a toll on his spirit. His resolve to see justice served was tested constantly as he faced the harsh reality of his mother's actions. The support from Emma and her father was a lifeline for Jake. "They helped me stay strong through all of this," he said, gratitude evident in his voice. "Emma's father made sure I had the guidance and support I needed." Their encouragement was a beacon of hope during the toughest moments. With their backing, Jake felt a renewed strength to push forward, despite the challenges ahead. Jake described how the legal process was long and arduous. "I had to recount my story over and over again," he said, a hint of exhaustion in his voice. "Each time, it felt like I was reliving the betrayal." The courtroom listened quietly as Jake spoke, his recounting of the repeated sessions showing how each retelling wore on his spirit, challenging his emotional resilience through the drawn-out process. Each retelling forced Jake to relive the betrayal. "It was hard to keep my emotions in check," he admitted, voice cracking slightly. "Every time I spoke about it, the pain felt fresh." Jake's struggle was evident as he detailed the difficulty of maintaining his composure while recounting the painful experiences, each session dragging him back into the hurt and confusion he tried to overcome. Emma's father reassured Jake that justice would be served. "He told me to keep pushing forward," Jake said, drawing strength from the memory. "His belief in the system helped me stay strong." Emma's father's words were a beacon for Jake, providing much-needed encouragement during the toughest moments. His assurance was a crucial factor in keeping Jake motivated, despite the grueling process. The hearings were emotionally draining for Jake. "But I knew it was necessary to bring the truth to light," he explained. Each session took a toll, yet Jake remained focused on his goal. The weight of his mission was heavy, but he understood the importance of exposing the truth, pushing through the emotional strain for the sake of justice. Jake's heart ached with each retelling. It was tough, But I stayed resolute, he said, determination evident in his voice. Each recounting of his story was a painful reminder of the betrayal, yet Jake's resolve never wavered. His commitment to seeking justice was clear, even as the emotional burden continued to weigh heavily on him. In the courtroom, Jake took a deep breath and revealed the full extent of his mother's actions. "She falsified documents and took out loans in my name," he said, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. The courtroom listened intently as Jake detailed how his mother's schemes had left him with a ruined financial future. Each revelation added more gravity to the case, underscoring the magnitude of her deceit. Jake's voice cracked as he explained how his mother had falsified documents and taken out loans in his name. "I had no idea any of this was happening," he said, the strain evident in his tone. The courtroom murmured in shock as Jake described how his mother's actions had plunged him into a mess of debt, leaving him with a future uncertain and burdened by her fraudulent deeds. Jake recounted how he discovered the betrayal and the steps he took to uncover the truth. "It started with a few strange things," he said, recalling his growing suspicions. He described how he had to dig through piles of paperwork and follow hidden trails to piece together the full story. His journey to expose his mother's wrongdoing was a long, hard-fought battle for the truth. The jury gasped as Jake recounted the extent of his mother's deception. "She left me with so much debt," Jake said, his voice heavy. The courtroom was filled with stunned silence as he detailed the burden of debt placed on him without his knowledge. The dramatic recounting highlighted the severity of the fraud and left everyone in the room in disbelief. The evidence laid bare the depth of his mother's fraud, shocking everyone present. "This is what I've been dealing with," Jake said, showing the documents and records. The courtroom was overwhelmed as the full extent of the deceit became clear. Jake's revelations left no room for doubt about the seriousness of his mother's actions, gripping the entire audience with its severity. The courtroom fell into a deep silence as the weight of Jake's testimony sank in. Everyone sat still, absorbing the impact of his words. The gravity of the situation was overwhelming, and the room felt heavy with the realization of the extent of his mother's deceit. Jake's voice echoed in the quiet, and the silence was punctuated only by the faint rustling of papers and the occasional sniffle from the audience. Tears streamed down the faces of the jury members, clearly moved by Jake's bravery and suffering. Some wiped their eyes discreetly, while others fought to maintain their composure. The young boy's courage in sharing his painful story touched everyone deeply. It was evident that the jury felt the full impact of Jake's ordeal, their empathy reflected in the glistening tears that stained their cheeks. Even the judge looked visibly moved as Jake's testimony continued. The judge's stern expression softened, and there was a brief pause before they spoke again. The atmosphere in the courtroom grew heavier with each passing moment, as if the walls themselves were absorbing the weight of the emotional testimonies. It was clear that the judge, too, felt the gravity of the young boy's brave revelations. As the courtroom buzzed with quiet conversations, Jake felt a mix of relief and sorrow. "I did what I had to do," he thought, realizing that while his mother's actions had caused him immense pain, his bravery had brought some measure of justice. The weight of the truth was both a burden and a relief. Jake understood that exposing the deceit was the first step towards healing. The story ended with Jake looking forward to rebuilding his life. "It won't be easy," he mused, "but I have hope." Despite the scars left by his mother's actions, Jake felt a glimmer of optimism for the future. The promise of a fresh start, though daunting, was something he was willing to embrace. With his courage and the support of those around him, Jake was ready to face whatever came next.